Talking about the ethics and integrity, Mr. Murthy, you have built Infosys and scaled Infosys. I am sure in that career, there must be number of times pressures to take shortcut, whether it is adversary environment of India, whether it is competitive market outside India. How did you handle these pressures? And what made you take a decision against that and with the hope that it will help you grow the business?
Well, first of all, I'm sure I've said this before, Harish used to be my boss at NASCOM. Therefore, when Harish said you have to come here on 28th of January, I said yes, so I'm here. Well, you asked a very important question that will be confronted by all of you who are going to build great companies, big companies, extraordinary companies, etc. In the beginning, it will be extremely tough because in a country like India, where there is so much of corruption, it may be coming down in the last 5-6 years thanks to the current leadership, but definitely at state levels there still is a certain level of corruption. But in our time, in the 80s, it used to be a lot more. So the first time, it is very painful, it's very costly. You will have to wait because if you don't agree to what they would want, they would delay your stuff. So my advice to you people is to accept the delay as the cost of doing business ethically. The moment you have said no twice, let me assure you, third time nobody will delay you. Because even in the mind of the most corrupt person, there is always a desire to get appreciation from honest people. I have found it in so many cases. So therefore, they are also looking for at least a few people that they want respect from. So therefore, just wait for a few events where you take a tough stand, and afterwards you will become the exception. And when people talk about corruption, they would say, look at Atul Nishar, we don't pay, he doesn't pay us any money, but we make sure that all his work is done properly. Because they also want a few examples that they can cite, that there are good people. And slowly, if everybody stands up, that number will increase. And that's the only way we can make this a country that is rid of corruption. So in the beginning, it is painful. It will mean delays. It will mean going to the office n number of times. But simply accept it as cost of doing business. And then later on, you will all be very happy that you have stood up.
Atul talked about discipline. So this triggers another thought in my mind. 10 days back, you were with Mr. Jeff Bezos, maybe the world's richest man.
Yeah.
And you cut short your speech from 20 minutes to 5 minutes because the function was 2 hours late. So 2 questions here. First is, what was the reaction of Mr. Jeff Bezos? And the second is, I would add to the, last year I had asked a question to you, that India has to do, say, $10 trillion by 2030. If you were the Prime Minister, what are the 3 things you would recommend? And the first thing which you had recommended was cultural transformation. And in the cultural transformation, you talked about hard work, honesty, discipline, and so on. So how do we scale discipline in the country? That was just part of the same question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, let me clarify the situation. The delay had nothing to do with Jeff. Jeff, Amit, they were all there at 9:30. The problem was with the Delhi crowd, which was indisciplined. They, of course, said there were long queues. That cannot be an excuse. So therefore, I was expressing my displeasure not at Amazon, which I knew were present from 9:30 when the function was to start, but at the crowd. Anyway, now the reaction of Jeff Bezos was that he was very understanding. He also believed in discipline. He is a great disciplinarian. He has run his country extremely well, his company extremely well. So he was, he fully understood my situation, and he smiled, he understood. So there was no issue at all. Now coming to your second question, you know, we listened to this excellent presentation by Rupa. It's a great idea that India uses AI, IoT, and machine learning, all of that, as what I term assistive technologies. That is, they won't replace human beings. They will make human beings even more productive. These technologies will improve the quality of work of these people, and therefore the country will benefit. I think they call it digital. I have been using the term assistive technologies so that it's easier to understand. Anyway, now the reality of India is that when your economy has to improve, there are three factors. I am not an economist, I'm a quackish economist, but still, I will say what I have understood out of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics has three major parameters, you can say, major factors. One is output, second is money supply, and third is expectation. Most macroeconomists are bothered about these three issues. Out of these, clearly output is the most important thing. That's what we mean by GDP, right? If the output of a country increases, the GDP increases, then the per capita GDP increases, then everybody has more money to spend, therefore the economy improves, etc., etc. But for the GDP to increase, for per capita GDP to increase, there are two factors. One is the revenue productivity, which is prices of what you buy or prices of what you sell. And second is work productivity. That is how much of work or how much of output you can produce in a unit of time. And in a country like India, it is extremely important for us to work on the second factor. The Indian productivity in most areas is very, very low. Let me give you a very simple example. 14% of Indian population, 14% of India's GDP is contributed by agriculture, on which about 52% of Indians depend upon directly or indirectly. Therefore, the per capita GDP of an agricultural worker in the country is 1/4 of India's per capita GDP of $2,000, which means $500, which is slightly more than $1 a day. Now, it is this person that requires to be supported. It is this person whose basic needs have to be supported. It is this person who has problems with, with availing of healthcare, education, nutrition, etc., etc. Therefore, if India has to improve, then we have to improve our work productivity. We have to be more disciplined. We have to have a better work ethic. I have conducted controlled experiments at various public places in India, where vis-a-vis the West, at airports, airport security. I have looked at other sectors too. I find that the productivity in most of the services that we avail of in public in India is lower. That has to improve. So therefore, I would say the cultural transformation that I was speaking last time is all about discipline, it's all about good work ethic, it's all about honesty, it's all about discipline, etc. Once that happens, I do believe that India will start growing much faster than otherwise.
Is Mohandas Pai here? Or is left? Oh, he's there. Okay. So Mohan, he was here in the afternoon.
Yeah, of course.
And he gave some numbers saying that up till now, let's say $40 billion are invested in startups.
Yeah.
$36 billion came from outside India.
Yeah.
$4 billion came from India. And he extrapolated these numbers to 2030. And he said, at this rate, the British colonial Raj will be replaced by digital colonial Raj, where the monies come from outside, because the Indian money is not coming into the startup world. How do we create Indian money? How do we create enthusiasm with the Indian investors to invest in the startups? What are your views on this?
Well, I happen to be the chairman of the Alternate Investment Policy Advisory Committee of SEBI. This is one of the most important issues that we have been discussing. That is, what are the policy changes that are required to make sure that there is more Indian money coming into the startup sector from India, more Indian money, more domestic money coming into, because today, by and large, it is from abroad. Mohan is right, absolutely right. So to do that, for example, pension funds must be allowed, corporations must be allowed. So in our government, banks must be allowed, wherever there is a certain excess money that is available in whatever corporation it is, whatever function it is, a certain percentage of that, if that is allowed to be invested in the Indian venture capital sector, I do believe that that amount will get increased. And we are all working on that. That's a very important issue that we are trying to tackle.
Okay. I guess we have now 10 minutes left. The session is Ask Me Anything. So we'll throw it open for audience to ask questions. Can we have the mics floating? Yeah, okay, please. What we will do is we'll start from one from here, one from here,
that's a good
and
idea.
then go,
That's
okay.
a good idea.
Right now we'll start from here, okay.
Yeah, good evening. I think it's a pleasure to see Mr. Murthy and all the delegates here. One question I have for the panel or for the distinguished guys here is, when we are talking of innovation, we are talking of evolutionary innovation as well as revolutionary innovation. So till now, what India has been doing is more of evolutionary revolution. Are there any thoughts how India can be seen more in revolutionary innovation?
Well, let's remember that most major inventions and innovations have come from the US, not even Europe, not Japan. It's simply because they created a culture there where there was incentive for people to become entrepreneurs. There was a porous learning ecosystem in the Silicon Valley. There was considerable focus of business schools on entrepreneurship, etc. So while you are right that most of our innovations are evolutionary, as you pointed out, but I do believe that as we move in this path, as we develop a problem-solving mindset, we too will come out with some inventions, perhaps some innovations which you call revolutionary, but it will take a little bit of time. I'm glad that thanks to all the wonderful venture capitalists available, thanks to all the wonderful entrepreneurs that are assembled here, we now have a situation where no grandmother will get worried if her grandson were to say, I am going to become an entrepreneur. Once upon a time, in the 60s when I was a student, we all had to either become engineers or doctors or civil servants. Later on, it became acceptable to go to business schools. Even at the time when I was passing out of engineering, going to business school was considered very risky. Later on, business schools became extremely acceptable. Today, becoming an entrepreneur, it has become acceptable. Tomorrow, I have no doubt at all that some of you will, in fact, come out with such revolutionary products. This is how the thing is going to evolve. So I am not worried. Please don't worry. It will happen. 20 years from now, when somebody who is going to continue this tradition from Harish is sitting here, you will hear several cases of extraordinary innovations and inventions.
So, any question from this side? Quick. Over. Maybe meanwhile, someone from here, this side.
Hi.
Please.
Hi,
go
good
ahead.
evening. Mr. Murthy here.
Yes.
So we've been hearing this entire day about how there's AI coming in and 5G is going to penetrate the market soon. Our company is from a very small town, a tier 3 city called Aurangabad. So we are facing issues with current infrastructure in terms of 4G as well, to use QR codes and everything. How do you think, if the current infrastructure is not that well, how do we expect tier 3 cities to go into the 5G or the next generation of AI without having current infrastructure, which is not developed yet?
Well, I think like we have done in most areas, connected with IT, right now we are in the process of using AI, machine learning, etc., to a small extent, to a very, very small extent, for projects that have value to the Western clients. And slowly we will build up our infrastructure, and there will be a few cases where even in India, we would be using those techniques, those ideas, and parallelly, we will develop the advanced communication infrastructure that you spoke about. And that's when these things will become ubiquitous, these things will become very much passe even in India. For example, today Facebook, look at Twitter, everybody and his brother is using here, right? Probably about 10 years ago, that was not so. But we have already picked up. So don't worry about it, it will happen.
Thank you very much.
Just bring another question. Creating jobs in India would be the number one priority.
Yeah.
Rupa talked about digital as one way of creating jobs at the, let's say, middle 300 million people level. What are your thoughts now? What are the methods by which India should create jobs, specifically from the startups perspective? What kind of business model they adopt by which jobs gets created?
You know, as I pointed out earlier, the biggest challenge we have is creating jobs for approximately 600 to 650 million Indians who are either illiterate or semi-literate. Out of them, not all of them would require jobs because many of them are much older, but certainly for probably about 200 to 300 million people who are semi-literate or illiterate, jobs are extremely important. Unfortunately, India has not done a good job in this area because the best way to have done was like what China did by starting with low-tech products. If we had started with low-tech products, if we had become the factory of the world, you and I know we used to go to Department of Electronics in 70s, and they had some silly phased manufacturing program where the duty on finished products was lower than the duty on components. I mean, such a silly stuff, right? So therefore, I would say that I don't know if it is possible, it may be too late today, but we still have to focus on creating jobs for these people who are semi-literate or illiterates, and that will only happen if we get to low-tech manufacturing and thereby move people from agriculture to the low-tech manufacturing. That's the only way.
But do you see that making the startups for 5 years completely, as a government, completely stays away from every possible tax form? Investors' perspective, the capital gains tax, and from the company perspective, income tax, GST, X, Y, and Z, whatever. For at least for 5 years, given that sort of protection, the entrepreneurship will flourish?
No, I think it is not the GST, it is not capital gains tax. None of that is the problem. We have to pay taxes. In fact, I personally feel we have to pay even higher percentage of taxes. That's not the problem. The problem is there is so much of delays in doing business in India. There is so much of friction to business in India. That is the problem. Unless the government becomes a true catalyst, unless it enhances the speed of business, we will continue to be a low growth economy.
Last question from here. Yeah. Last question we take on.
Hello.
Okay. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, Sanjay, yeah.
No. The day I became a venture capitalist, I realized that I will be investing in companies who have a certain probability of success. Therefore, we have all assumed that out of 10, only 1 or at best 2 may succeed. So by definition, that means we have accepted a certain concept of risk, a certain level of risk. Now, what is most important is, out of these companies, 8 may fail, the return from the remaining 2 will have to be an acceptable return, better than return that I would get from much safer investments. That's the way we approach. Of course it is risk.